Hello, Brett here. Tim had some unscheduled travel come up this week, and so we were not able to record our fourth and final Fez episode. Say that four times fast. In the meantime, I've dug into our Discord Game Club vault for this interview with Michael Betts, one of the developers of Tower Song, by our hosts Biostats and Calamity Nolan. If that's not your thing, please join us next week when we return. I'm really hoping Tim at least gets to 32 cubes. Be well.
Welcome to Discord Game Club's Just Rhetoric, a podcast where Nolan and myself interview content creators. Today, we are excited to have game developer Michael Betts, co-founder and game director of Omega Entertainment. I am your host, Ryan, or Biostats on the Discord, and I will let them introduce themselves right now.
Hey, everybody. I'm Nolan, Calamity Nolan in the Discord.
And I'm Michael Betts. I think just Michael in the Discord. Very creative. Thanks for having me, guys. Happy to be here.
A little background is you are a principal in the company, as well as the lead developer and story designer for Tower Song.
Yeah, that's correct. I quit my day job in 2022. Yeah, I guess that's right. To make video games. Quickly decided I didn't want to be a solo dev, as popular as that can be in the indie scene. I didn't want to do that. I didn't trust myself to make good decisions. So I then formed the studio with a longtime buddy of mine. Actually, we met each other through, really became good friends. We met each other at board game nights, became really good friends playing Pathfinder. I was the DM and he was my gunslinger. So which is, I think, taught us both a lot about game design. And so I knew he was a good person to bring on board when I decided to do this thing.
Now that Tower Song is out, do you want to give the 2-minute overview to sell a couple copies?
Yeah, I'd love to sell at least a couple. Yeah. So Tower Song is a 2D JRPG. The focus is on deliberate, crafted, and challenging battles over repeated random grinds. You can choose from one of 4 different pre-made player characters to be your voice, your avatar for the game. Each of those 4 characters has, each of the classes in the game, very, very unique class. Really kind of inspired a lot by like Dungeons and Dragons kind of class design. So the same story will play out, but with each character, which of the 4 different characters you pick, you get slightly different cutscenes. All the dialogue's different for each ones, and of course how you play is different for each. By far, the most popular pick, it seems, for good reason, is the witch Tally and her familiar Gigi. I love this because Gigi is based on our cat Gigi, who sadly we lost November 2022, basically right after I started making the game. So at that point, he actually already had a cameo in the game. There's a little cat you could walk up and talk to. And I said, no, he has to be a character. He has to be a party member. He's got his own abilities and spells. He needs to be in this game. And then we actually put the game into early access on that anniversary in 2023. So when you first run the game, hit new game, you'll see Gigi's face there forever.
That's great. Yeah, we both played Tower Song in the last couple of weeks. We did a little game club, Ryan and I.
Great.
Made sure we picked different characters and kind of compared the notes. It was a good time. And I guess I was the basic one because I picked the witch and cat.
It's the right answer.
You gotta.
Gigi's never the wrong answer.
It's true.
I made a mistake putting him into the game, and it's really, really bad for the other 3, really. Yeah.
It's so funny. Nolan started just prior to me. And so I was like, I think I'm going to pick the witch that has the cat. And he's like, I already did that one. Like you got to pivot.
Really, I should have given everyone a cat. Give the fighter like a little gerbil or something. Everyone should have a little pet with them, so everybody can feel like they're
Lessons learned for your next games.
I'll do that. Do that in the sequel. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So who did you end up picking, Ryan?
So I went with the mech slash Techno Lance.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Quick programming update. The music in the interstitials comes from Tower Song, and the composer is Will Aylshire. What made you quit your job in 2022?
I would say, you have to have multiple things that have to be in place for you to make a kind of crazy decision like that. I definitely had a good support structure in place with my wife, then fiance. I had the savings that I had from selling a house that I wisely bought in like 2013 before the market blew up. Then COVID happened. Everything was worth three times more, and I'm like, now's the time to sell and collect a bunch of money. So I kind of had the money, had the support of my wife, and I have been, I would say, in the game development community since sophomore year of high school. So many of us, playing around with different tools. I actually got my start. The first thing I ever did, well, actually, my first thing of doing game development was in probably first grade with Logo Writer. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that, but it's really basic scripting language, and you can draw stuff on the screen with a turtle. That was kind of the thing they put into it's like teaching kids how to program. It's like, hey, make the turtle move over here. And now you've drawn a triangle. And I remember I made like a little adventure game that my teacher couldn't finish for my like final project. So I've loved games since I met them. So I've always been, any chance I got, I've been playing around with them. So anyway, and then I actually went in 2004 for 2 years. I went to DigiPen up in Seattle to do video game programming. Decided that I kind of hated programming and left the school, but I always wanted to go back to that as a career. I mean, that had been my idea to be a career from the beginning. So always in the back of my mind, and someday I'm going to go back. I'm going to go into game development somewhere. So the stars were kind of right. Did the incantations and the summoning and decided to quit my job and give it a go.
Oh, you actually went to DigiPen. Sorry to.
Yeah.
No, I know for me growing up, that was sort of like the only game program around was DigiPen.
Yeah.
And I've actually never met someone who went there, so that's interesting to hear.
Actually, the game director on our follow-up game that we're publishing is a DigiPen alumni. He actually graduated, and that's how we met. Yeah, so if you ever get to meet him, that'll be 2 people.
There you go. Can you tell us a little bit more about your game studio? Where did the name Omega Entertainment come from? How many people? Where are you located? Just what's your story there?
This is a really silly story. The name came from so I used this name Omega Entertainment as my website in 2001 to publish my StarCraft maps and then later my RPG Maker games. And the reason it was called Omega Entertainment with an I, in case anyone's trying to Google me, just go to oi.games if you're trying to go there. Anyway, is I took an AutoCAD class in like junior year, and I decided to make I was in that class, I'm going to make a logo for my website, and I was able to make a donut, and I was able to make a little like I, lowercase I, and I was like, okay, I'll make a name out of this, Omega Entertainment, because that's how 16-year-olds, make creative branding decisions. And so when I came back to this at the time when I started making Tower Song, although I took the game design seriously, I didn't take the business seriously. And I was like, let's just reference that old school thing. That'll be fun. That'll be cute. Of course, not thinking like, what if I actually want this to be business that people can Google or anything? Like, well, I'll reuse the old stuff and I'll get an old school looking logo and I'll try to. I want it to feel kind of retro. I'm making an RPG Maker game, which is what Tower Song is. So let's just lean into it. Felt like the right decision. So I was living in Seattle at the time, and I now live in Vancouver, Washington, which is right across the river from Portland, Oregon. So my partner is from Colorado. I don't know how specific all these people want me to get, but he's from Colorado, which is where I'm originally from, and he's I would say our lead systems designer. And he was a what he helped me with the design on Tower Song. We didn't really have a lead designer on Tower Song, but he was a big part of that, especially the class design. I think Ryan was mentioning that he likes the mech character as Owen. That was Nate's baby. That was such a great idea. That's his name, Nate. And then Ishin joined about halfway through development. He's from the Seattle area as well. As our programmer, actually met him through the wonderful Seattle Indies community, which any of our Pacific Northwest game indie people probably know of. If not, you should look it up. And then kind of now the team has grown. So Ishin is his partner is an artist named Annie. So I was like, great, you come with an artist. So we kind of brought her into the team. And then Nate's friend Chris, who is a kind of a marketing guru, we brought him on to help us with marketing, but then also kind of get him going into game design as well. So I would say we have kind of like 5 staff right now, and it's been fun. We also have some artists, and I would say maybe our extended family. We've got the composer Will Aylshire, who did the soundtrack for Tower Song that you've hopefully all been enjoying. And we had the pixel artist as well. We'll just say he goes by Matt. I will butcher his Polish name if I try to pronounce it. But he also is. Then we have the other team that we're working with. They're not technically part of the studio. I won't get too far in the weeds on that, but.
You've got a lot of close connections here that you brought everyone in and you're all making games together. That's great.
Yeah, I think I felt, especially, we were self-funded startup, and when you're a self-funded startup, everybody's working with their spare time and their spare dollars. It was really important to me from the beginning that we can feel like a family, that we feel like we're in this together, that we're not just trying to like make a buck off each other, because we also didn't figure we would make a buck. And I always said too at the beginning, I wanted to start as I meant to go on, meaning let's treat each other now the way we would treat each other if we had $1 million and everybody was doing this full time. So it's been important and I've told people, we are humans making games before we are a company producing products. So, people need time off, or we've got conflicts, or, we're feel like we want to crunch. We're all crunching a little bit, working in our spare time, but there were points at which some of us were more full time, and it's just let's make decisions that work for us as people, not whether or not it's necessarily the smartest choice for a business or the product, whatever that means. And I think when you do that, you end up getting good products anyway, because you treat your people right, and they're all on board, and so. And we've kind of gone for a little bit of a co-op model as well. So I initially had like a kind of business myself, brought in Nate Montgomery as as like kind of second business owner, and now our artist Annie, she's now also a co-owner. So now we have 3 owners. And we invited Ishin. He wanted nothing to do with it. It's just the way he's like, no, I don't want to deal with the money stuff. Leave me out of it. I just want to do my code. And I was like, okay, well then Annie represents the 2 of you, so I'll consider it co-op that way. But that's important to us too. Obviously we don't have the money, we don't have staff, we're not in a position to not lay off people, but just seeing how that has gone the last really couple of years, I just want to put us in a position where everybody has a stake, and if we do have to sell out and then all get fired, and everybody gets paid for that, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You have a structure where everyone has a voice. how do you, as a company, decide what kind of games to make? How do you make decisions?
And this is why it's important that it's a tight knit studio. We all basically have to come to the decision together. That's obviously would be impossible if there was 100 of us, but there's 5 of us, and really only 3 of us who care about the business side of things. Like I said, Ishin, I don't care, leave me alone. Just tell me which game I'm working on. I'll work on it. Okay. But so like for our second project, um, after Tower Song, Annie and Ishin we're telling me, we think we're going to keep making games. I'm like, well, then let's do it together. And Nate also had a game idea, and I didn't really have a game idea, but so we kind of just put a couple game ideas out there, and we just kind of looked at it like, what are we in the mood to work on? Because if we don't feel like working on it, why force it? Especially because we're still trying to kickstart this. And then also there's an element of like, do we feel like there is a successful business strategy here? Do we think we could sell this game? We actually talked about making a mobile game next, but realized that something that we'd be excited about it and that wouldn't be gross and all that. But we also realized we don't know how to sell a mobile game yet, so maybe we should take some time to figure that out before we go on board to making a mobile game. We kind of understand how to sell a game on Steam, like Tower Song. So let's do another one of those first to see if we can get any better at that, and then we can talk about a mobile game that could be fun. But so there's an element just of just because everybody has a stake. It's, well, what does the business want? Obviously everybody wants the business to succeed, and then everybody's tied to it. So I think, I don't know, it worked. And as far as like what that worked to pick the second project, for the third project, will that work again? I don't know, but probably. I think with major decisions, general with everything, we've kind of just, and I think the model will be just kind of per project, who's making the calls in this thing. So now I'm acting as the producer, so I'm making calls about timeline, scope, schedule. But we have a game director for our next game, and which is Annie, and so she's going to make calls about what's right for that game. But then we just let everybody talk, let everybody have a voice, and generally I think the most important thing is if everybody has the same intention, we all want to make the best game we can. You don't get into a ton of fights anyway. And I think what we've had is like really good debates and discussions about what the game should look like, including with Tower Song. And I think ultimately just inviting that debate, and then if you have good conversation, healthy, productive conversation and debate, my thought is eventually you come to the right answer rather than just going with Mike's answer or Nate's answer or Ishin's answer. It's what's actually the right answer. Because if the answer that I come up with can't stand the scrutiny of my team members, how is it really the right call? So we haven't had any like major, like, what are we going to do? This is a total disagreement, total like, break a vision, and maybe ask me that question again after we've gotten through that. But so far we've been able to just kind of, everybody's on the same page and we want the same thing. There's plenty of debate about what's the right design choice, but that's, you never get away from that. But you wouldn't want I don't believe in the auteur model really for game development. I think that's a mistake, especially for smaller teams like this. So there's so much talent and ingenuity across the team. Why would I ever say you are the only one who gets to make this decision? It's all your call, and you're just limited to one brain. It just doesn't make sense to me, even if it's a talented brain.
So you have talked a little bit about your design process here, your development process. And I know you mentioned earlier that you did early access for Tower Song. Can you talk a little bit about your entire, from beginning to end process for making a game? Are there any sort of guiding principles that you use to make sure you arrive at, the product you want to arrive at?
That's an interesting question. There's the answer that I have now for like the second project, and then probably the answer of like what happened with Tower Song, which is very different answers, right? I would say that going into Tower Song, probably, my number one of my, I'm not gonna say my number one, who talks like that? One of my goals was I want to do everything wrong so I can do it again better. So I'm gonna go list the game on Steam, for sale on Steam, and I'm gonna get everything wrong, and then I'm gonna figure it out from there. I'm going to, make these design decisions. I'm going to like execute this way, and I'm not going to worry if it's the right thing. like our friend over there at Dragoon Effect, it might be terrible, but that's okay. And I think that's actually a really great mantra for creative work, because if you stop and say what's the perfect way forward, you will never finish anything. You'll probably barely start anything. And I think my superpower, if I have any, when it comes to game development, is that I'm always willing to just keep moving forward ahead, even if it's maybe not the right answer. And I think that is the one of the biggest reasons that Tower Song is shipped today, as we're having this conversation, because I just like, no, we're just going to keep moving forward, even though it's wrong or we have a better idea. We also have to keep moving forward. So I think what I would say I learned about how to do all this stuff, and but saying all which to say, how I would have answered you 2 years ago, it would be very different, and probably honestly would have been like, well, I'm not sure, but I'm going to try some things and see what works. And for your first time around, I think that would be my advice to anybody. Just I don't know, just try it. Just go for something. If you have an idea for a process, try it. And if it works, keep doing it. If it doesn't work, change it. Continuous improvement. And so I think, and there's lots of nuance to the question that you asked, but I think there's the question of how to get work done as a team. And for that, we followed a very stereotypical kind of agile Scrum process, but which is very advantageous. And we really tried to hold to that even when real life interrupted or people couldn't do stuff. Just, okay, well, let's still have our sprint planning. Let's still come back and say, what work did we get done? And that set of like mini milestones and mini goals and being able to come back and review the work, I think helps keep people on task, keep people focused, and helped me kind of understand from kind of the project management perspective, like where we're at and which direction we are moving towards. And I think, in terms of like going from the start of the game to early access to shipping, while I probably won't do early access again, would be the lesson I learned, at least certainly not like for a game like Tower Song. But really, I mean, going back to this as a game, this was a studio for people, not for products. We went to early access because we were kind of running out of money, and we weren't sure if we were going to continue working on the game. We knew that Ishin was going to have to go back looking for a day job, and I was going to soon have to go back to a day job. And we said, well, obviously we want to finish this, but we don't know when that'll happen. And if we all both get day jobs tomorrow and that's kind of the end of it, or it takes much longer, we want there to be something on the resume that everybody can say, I shipped this game, I put it in early access. And when we put Tower Song in early access, it was there. The whole campaign was there. 2 of the 4 characters were there, but we felt like it was a complete experience that we were proud of, and so we put it out there. And so, as a business decision, it wasn't wise, but as a people first decision, it was absolutely the right call at the time. And then ultimately that became true of putting 1.0 out there in June too. Is the same thing. Like, well, it was going into early access gave us the motivation to keep working even though we were getting day jobs, and somehow I came up with some other part-time gigs and kept the money to keep going, and but the same thing of like, well, we still like 1.0, okay, May, okay, finally June, we're shipping. We're not going to ship in July because we could work on this game for another year, but we want to be able to say we shipped the game. And that's been an incredible experience having done that too. I still don't know if I answered that question.
You answered a lot of it. Thank you.
Okay.
You answered some further questions I had as well, so that was great.
You brought up something that I think is pretty interesting, which is you've sort of outlined 2 different types of goals, and it's like one is the business and the other is personal. And it seemed like Tower Song achieved both for you. But how do you set personal goals? How do you measure those? Do you set them as a studio? Do you set them individually? Are they tied together?
Good question. I went into it with my goals, and I think I was just rolling in the dark tower, just drawing my hand a card, just drawing my team to me based on those values. When going into it, I knew that I wanted to ship a game no matter what, whether it was successful or not. I knew that I wanted to be fun. I wanted to ship a game before, like more important than being financially successful was just having a finished product out there. Because I figured that would open the doors to do everything else and do it smarter, better. So there's also an element of like shipping as fast as possible because I know I'm not going to get it right. What do I know? I've never launched the game before. How do I know? I mean, I've put out projects when, in high school and stuff like that, but never just like commercial full release. This is an actual thing. We went through the whole experience. We did ads, we did all that stuff. So I think, I had those goals of, I want these experiences. I want to learn these lessons. And every time I would sit down and talk with someone and say, hey, do you want to come on board? Here's what we're trying to do. It was very easy for me to then elucidate to these people who either were or would soon become my friends. Here's where I'm at. Here's what my goals are. Here's what I'm trying to do. And I think it just came from that. If you're going to start something by yourself and then you're going to kind of collect a team, like know what you want to accomplish. And then I think if you can explain that to people, you will attract the right person. And if you hold to that value set, this is what I'm looking for no matter what, like we're here to ship games, we're here to make mistakes, we're here to, like really do it correctly. It's going to be terrible, but we're going to do it anyway. But if you can tell that to people, people are only going to sign up for that if that's what they want. So I think also just being fully upfront and blunt with everybody there to talk to, like, here's what we're doing. I don't know where we're going. I don't know if we'll be successful, but this is what we're trying to do. And also this is how we're going to do it. We have this process. This is how we make these decisions. And I think for me, I think like finishing was such a huge, like if there was like number one thing to me, I probably would say like we are going to finish whatever it is we start. I think that's, even if it's bad, I think that's, delivering is so much more valuable than, even delivering something bad is so much more valuable than just not delivering anything. Because we always tell ourselves like, not selling a game will always make us $0. We could sell a terrible game and maybe take $10, but that's $10 more than not selling a game at all. So we have to sell a game.
One of the things, sort of getting ready for this, was I went back and I read your blog posts for Tower Song. So that was interesting that you had sort of an arc in those, right? Which probably paralleled your arc in actual development. One of the things I think in your early ones that you made clear was how you picked Twine and the Scaled Agile, and like that focused you, but at the same time, that also helped you conceptualize the product, or in this case, the game itself. Is that still something you are using today, or is that a one and done?
By the time we shipped the game, we had gone away from Twine only because it was actually really hard to collaborate with multiple writers. So I ended up pulling that Twine script over into a big Google Doc, and eventually multiple Google Docs, because I learned that if you have a 300-page Google Doc script, it actually is really terrible on the browser, especially if you need to edit the whole thing. It's a lot to put in memory at once. But I think at the time, and maybe this is the right answer, and in terms of like Agile, we're still doing Agile, but we're kind of tweaking it. We're moving away from that model a little bit. It's just not really working for us anymore. But we're still following some of the same principles that we follow. And I guess I would, I think an interesting maybe way to answer that would be that whatever helps you right now is worth doing. Whether or not you stick with it forever or it becomes like a thing, like we're always doing it this way. In fact, I would be suspicious of anything that a team was doing. Yeah, we've been doing it this way with this tool in this manner for 5 years. Really? You haven't found any better way to do it? You haven't been able to improve on it at all? There probably are examples, of course. I'm sure you could find one, but I think it's more valuable to say, okay, was this helping? How could I do this better? I was having to send these flat HTML for Twine. I'd have to do my edits, send an HTML file to the next person who was going to write. They'd have to load it, do their edits, send it back to me. I'd have to do diffs, like comparison, to figure out what they changed. And I was like, okay, this isn't working anymore. When it was just me writing it, yeah, it was great. It was very easy to visualize, conceptualize. And so I think for that, it had value because I was able to kind of conceptualize the game narrative and figure out how this was all going to piece together. I think if I'd just been doing a Google Doc, it would have been a nightmare. But I graduated, or the needs changed. So how to manage a game script today, I probably some version of both, maybe use Twine or something like that to conceptualize maybe the overall arc, but I probably wouldn't just use it to write the whole script like I did before. But I think also the lesson I learned there was if you don't have somebody who can just write, I think the big lesson from Tower Song of Twine, if you don't have somebody who can just be going over the script for like an RPG, like writing is so important, and the quality of that writing is so important. That's a big pillar of that game. That writing has to be great, and so even today, like there's a lot. I have some regret about. Well, there'll be lines or some scenes in Tower Song like, that didn't land the way I wanted to, or that scene could have been punchier, or maybe we could have expanded on this character or that character a little more. And I wish I'd had kind of a full-time writer or full-time part-time, but a dedicated writer who could just kind of sit with these problems and iterate on it the way that we iterated on the game design and the class balance and stuff like that. But that's not really what you asked. But yeah, it's always evolving. Our tool set always evolves. I'm a big fan of Jira as a way to like organize work and visualize work. So I don't know if I'll ever migrate off that tool, but as far as how we use it, it's a constant progress. I don't know, my team probably hates me sometimes, like, oh, he's changing the process again. I'm like, we can do this better. This is not working for us. Let's change this. In fact, as a team, we do fairly regular retros where we kind of ask, like, from a process perspective, what's working? What do we need to change? What is how we're doing this work actually working for us, or do we need to change something? And a lot of times I get feedback from the team. It's like, this is confusing, or this is slowing us down, or this isn't working, and we'll change.
I mean, I would argue that you were doing Agile as intended. The constant evolution of your processes are what it's all about. Retrospectives are, by my money, the most impactful thing you can do in a developmental process. Just how do you get better? Move into talking a little bit more deeply about Tower Song since we're there. Can you talk a little bit about what the inspiration was for this game?
The inspiration was pretty direct, in that I was initially attempting to remake the RPG Maker game that I did in high school, which itself was sort of a self-insert isekai, which wasn't a term back then, or at least not in Middle America where I was. But it was so this is 2001. RPG Maker 2000 had been fan translated, I believe. I don't think it had actually been released in America. And so all of my friends in this StarCraft map making, campaign making community were starting to play with this tool called RPG Maker. I thought that was great. And for whatever reason, the thing that people did was they made a little RPG that had everyone from, the message board. They had a little avatar in there that would sort of represent, some sort of visualization of who that person really was and their personality, which might be drawn from their avatar that they were using. If somebody's walking around, they always had like an orc as their avatar. They'd show up in a game inevitably as an orc, that kind of thing. And people were making a bunch of chapter ones of these games, and I said, I'm gonna finish one. So I started working on this. Didn't tell anyone I was working on it because I knew if I told anyone, that would take all the excitement away, and I stopped working on it. And I didn't tell anyone until I was almost done, and then I actually talked to a friend. I said, "Hey, I'm making this thing. I'm like 80% done, but I need help." And then he came on and he actually helped me. So even from early on, I knew I couldn't trust myself to do things alone. But so coming back to this, I'm going to redo Omega Entertainment. I'm going to get back into the game design thing. And I thought, well, let's just do an RPG Maker. We'll do it quick, just to get my head in the space of game design and like art and all that stuff. And I said, okay, well, maybe a fun thing to do would be just to remake that game using legal assets. I was a kid back then. I mean, a lot of, asset rips and stuff. That game would not be legal to release today. Many different companies would be able to sue me. So that was kind of the initial part of it. But then, I didn't want to just remake it. I took the basis of that game and then just kind of reimagined it from a more, from a, somebody in his late teens to somebody in his late 30s. Okay, what kind of game would I like now? Would I be interested in playing? What kind of story would intrigue me? And I was able to find through some of the characters. I found a story that kind of spoke to me, like personally, that I thought would be interesting. And I thought if I could, if this story speaks to me, I can kind of get behind that inspiration. That inspiration will help me breathe life into these characters in this world. And so it kind of all came from that.
How'd you come up with like the plots and the main theme?
How to come up with the plot and the main theme. Plot is actually fairly similar to that our 2001 RPG Maker game. I don't want to spoil it, so I, some of the specifics of what got carried over, but that original game there is a similar arc. So enough to say that in this game you go through kind of a forest, you go to this soul tower, and then you come back and you go to a desert area and you kind of explore that. And that was actually also the first 2 acts of that old RPG Maker game. You go through this forest level, you climb up a tower, and then you go into the forest. And then there's actually in that game there's actually like 5 towers that you go through. So I think as I was looking at like, well, how far can I go? In the time that I'm giving myself to make this game. That other game was actually a little bit longer. There's a lot more to it, but it would take much longer to make all that in a much higher standard. It would have taken me 5 years to do that whole scope of the original game. So, but I saw this like, okay, I keep putting towers in this old game. Something about a tower must have been interesting to me. It's a cool dungeon, I guess, rather than just like a castle. It's a tower. So I said, okay, maybe there's something to these towers. Maybe I'll make it. It's like a 2 tower situation. I don't know what's going on here. What was my younger self doing? But and then I think from there also like there's a session of me trying to figure out what to name the game. I was just shooting out ideas at the team and trying to see what they reacted to, and somehow we landed on Tower Song, and that name itself, which fit the world that we had kind of built at that point, itself then became kind of inspiration for what happened. Well, what if the Tower Song itself was diegetic? What if the towers sung to each other? What does that mean? I think that gets to some of my world building, my approaches to world building, which is just set up some interesting fantasy rules and then ask how that would affect the world. So we said, okay, there's towers and they have a tower song. What would different cultures react to that? How would they feel about that? What would their perspectives on it be? And that allowed us to kind of create the region of Kadam in the desert, and how they view the fire tower that lives over there, and then how the people in the northern area in the forest area view that tower and what that meant. And I think the theme of the game eventually, I think now, this going back to how I do things now versus how I did them then. Now, like for our second project, we've already established at the beginning, before the game was even really playable, what is the theme? One line. What is it we're trying to tell players with the game? And I think that is such a good opening, because now, and we have one, and it's such a strong thematic statement. Everything can kind of follow after that. And I think the game design, and I think this game is going to show that our sophomore effort is going to be much cleaner and more deep because of that. With Tower Song, I didn't really kind of come into that theme until a little bit later, where I started thinking about these towers and the nature of the world and how these characters relate to each other. But the theme I think I started out with is that it's about these, despite all these like epic world things going on with towers and what all that means, that there are these characters, these Mannonites that are relating to each other, and they've had this falling out, and these friendships that have come together and split apart, and I think that I spoke to me originally of, can I tell the story about these characters, especially Solace and Kieran, two of the party members, who are best friends, and what happened to drive them apart, and now they're kind of split apart, and why is that? Now they're kind of reuniting, and how is that going to go? And if is it going to go any differently, kind of thing. And I think that spoke to me in some of the friendships that I had and lost over the years. And I think that, and then as the game developed, we kind of landed on some other more interesting themes too, just as a result of like the world building that we were doing. We just sort of stumbled in. Oh, well, this is interesting. This is probably something we should focus on too.
What is something you would like players to take away from the game?
I think from a story perspective, it's funny, like, because if I'm doing like a post-mortem on Tower Song now, I see all the ways, and this is probably inevitable when you make a game, right? You're like, oh, I should have done a better job of doing this. But I think what I would have wanted players to walk away from Tower Song was feeling like there is nuance to every relationship and friendship, that there's two sides to every conflict, and they're both wrong and they're both right. There's not like black and white with things. Everybody has a good reason for doing things. You have four characters in that you can play as. Each of those characters has very different motivations and opinions about what's going on in the plot. And that was really important to us, which also created a lot of work. But we wanted to express that to say, it's not just picking a character class, you're also picking like a mood and an opinion and a perspective. And it's four different perspectives on everything that's going on. Tally's a little more she might come off as like self-absorbed in some ways, but she's really just very loyal to Solace and to her friends. And when anything that's trying to interrupt that or make problems with that, she has no time for it. And where then you have Neat, who is very focused on, he's like the fighter character. He's very focused on, he's this like ex-cop. He's basically an ex-cop from like a fascist state, and he's trying to redeem himself. And so he's asking a lot of questions about what are we doing? We're getting involved, we're interfering in all this. Is this really the right thing to be doing? So he has kind of this, he's a little bit aggressive, but I think he also has a lot of regret, and he's bringing a lot of that. He's very introspective and very questioning, and he brings that to the game. You have Porphyry, the barbarian fighter, who has been deeply scarred and traumatized by these towers that she had. The tower that she grew up in and around eventually like collapsed and fell, and it led to this thing called the Breach, when all these demons basically destroyed her homeland. So she's coming into this perspective of trying to prevent another breach and trying to redeem her people and what was lost there. And then we have a Zoan, and he's just more of a curious kind of, he's maybe the most innocent of all of them. He just wants to learn, wants to get out there, just like see what's going on, takes everything at face value. And so you just get, and that allowed the script to kind of breathe, and we ended up writing the scenes often for different versions, because like, well, that's not how Porphyry would react to this, the way that Tally would react. They would both react to this same event very differently. And then the characters should then react to those reactions, more naturally too. So I think, and then eventually we came to this interplay with Solace and her sister too, and then Solace and Kieran, and how these characters relate to each other. And I think all those like one-on-one relationships, I'd want players to walk away thinking about, the different ways of how you can view the same story, maybe from a different perspective, and have a very different conclusion, even though the same thing, you got the same information, literally the same, the plot's not different, it's the same plot, and you could have the characters at the end arrive at very different conclusions. Well, how could that be? Well, it's because of where they started wasn't the same. I think from a gameplay perspective, I'd want players to walk away feeling like they had a really I think that their time was rewarded, that they had to really think about their strategy, but that they got to just really like push themselves to the limit. Maybe they played on hard mode too. Even normal mode can be challenging. But that they were able to figure out clever mechanics and feel rewarded for coming up with good strategies and good party dynamics.
So, what was the impetus for having 4 different characters? You choose one.
Because I don't know how to tell myself no and just say this is what the 4 players should be, what the 4-person party should be. I knew that I wanted the game scope to be about, let's say, 10 hours long. And I just had all these ideas for characters and classes that I wanted to express. And so I said, I had a prototype, and the prototype was maybe, which you can play on itch.io, actually, if you really want to. And it's, I don't know, an hour and a half long. And all these characters are in there. And it kind of playing through the prototype, I felt like all these class designs, there was something there. There was something interesting there. I wanted to have a game with all these different characters in them, but I knew that I could stuff 9 characters into a 10-hour story and have it really work. You just wouldn't get time enough with everybody. Interestingly, as the game goes on, the party, kind of like each chapter of the game, the party does end up split. You get very little time with just the same 4 people, even once you have like the full party in the end. There's really only like one part of the game where that's actually true. Because I just I don't know, I wanted to change things up, but it led to some fun things. But yeah, really it was just I have these ideas for these characters. Most of them are, let's see, all four of them are like that original. They're based on real people. And some of it was just I have a good idea. Like I want a barbarian. Also, I want like a wizard. And but I don't want just a wizard. So what am I going to do there? Now Gigi has to be a playable character. So what are we going to do with that? So um, I think that was one of the first decisions we did make about this game after the prototype was okay. I'm going to have four selectable characters. That way, I can play around with all these tools and have fun making this, but I don't have to make a game that's 30 hours long. But it turned out to be just as much development time. It probably would take me just as long because having to remake the same 10-hour campaign with 4 different characters was just as hard. I don't know what I was like, but it's you live and you learn. But knowing what I know now, I would have said no, just make a 30-hour game and just put them all in there. It's fine. Like it'll take you just as long. Like don't worry about it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed all of the different battle mechanics. So getting to choose the characters and figure out the different tactics based on that was a lot of fun. Where
Great.
Where did you get inspiration for all of the different orthogonal battle styles? Was there a lot that you had to cut out, or how did that process go?
I like that term orthogonal. I'm going to steal that from marketing if you don't mind. Orthogonal battle style. I will give credit to most of that class design from to Nate Montgomery, who designed most of those classes, and I believe his answer would be along the lines of we were all really inspired by like Dungeons and Dragons, and he also plays a lot of. In fact, actually, we met playing the World of Warcraft TCG, which is like Magic the Gathering but Warcraft. And it got canceled when Hearthstone came out, but we played it religiously up until then. And I think if you're looking at how the mechanics interplay, it's knowing that I think if we were to remake Tower Song, it would either be a card based battler game or like a Dungeons and Dragons kind of turn-based like party game. I think you'd see exactly where we were coming from, where our headspace was at with that. There's a lot of like, so many states on this character, like, counters on the card, and you play this other card and it has that interplay. So probably actually like games like Magic the Gathering, TCG games, and I would say, and then I think the Dungeons and Dragons from the aspect of like you really inhabiting the character and feeling like when I'm playing this character, I feel like a berserker. Like everything is around that. I want to feel like that power fantasy that you get from those like more from those kind of games, more so than I think some of the traditional JRPGs and the Final Fantasies where the class designs are maybe not as different in terms of mechanics. Whereas like Dungeons and Dragons, like wildly different. Like you might like there's no like this guy, he has to write his spells down in a day. This guy prays for spells. This guy, like, you still kind of get spells, but it's like wildly different. These people don't even have spells. Like it's just you can have very different kind of mechanics in between classes in D&D, and I think that we were kind of inspired by that too.
One of the things you said in the blogs is the turn-based battles are difficult, and it's interesting you chose that for your first game. And then you also discussed sort of how to make that fun, and it made me pause and think like, yeah, I played a million JRPGs, and a lot of them had turn-based, and like 3 came off the top of my head where I was like, oh, the battles were so fun in that. But for the rest, it was like incidental, or they were fine. So what made you choose that route?
If you're going to make a 10-hour RPG that's interesting for those 10 hours and feels like it's worth the money, they have to be interesting 10 hours. I can't give you repeatable grinding battles that are boring that you just repeat for there can be no filler. Every moment of that 10 hours has to feel interesting. And so there's just, I think for the size of the team that we had, trying to make an RPG with a small team in a short period of time, I don't think we could have done it any other way without the game just feeling incomplete. So I really, not to disparage some of those random battles or the grinding mechanics in JRPGs, because sometimes like that just is the mechanic, and they, when used well, it just serves a larger game. But you can't do it in a short game. I just don't think the game would work. You'd feel like there wasn't any content.
I have a couple notes on like specific things that were in the game.
Sure.
The red vision cones.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead, give Tim his Metal Gear Solid shout out here.
These are a few of my favorite things. When the vamp bites, when pain's bees sting, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my Metal Gear things, and then I don't feel so bad.
Shortcut paths backwards like Dark Souls.
I found a way to reference Dark Souls, by the way.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it had every episode got to find a way.
Oh yeah, I mean, so for Bloodborne, I played Bloodborne. I think the year it came out. I mean, it just changed me forever. I think in terms of game design and sensibilities, I think that's the most interesting about those Souls-like games is that, and something that I could feel, like starting out Bloodborne and just getting massacred by the first thing I found, for like 30 minutes, and then by the end of the game, how I would eventually come to bosses or enemies that I would one shot, and like, oh, like they changed my brain over the course of that game. I mean, and it's still the case. And I think that level design was so interesting, and just the feeling of like you open a door and you're somewhere you recognize. You're like, oh, okay. Like that's such a cool moment. I think there was a little bit of that for sure, still driving me, that DNA when I got to there. Yeah, no, it's funny you talk about the red vision cones. I don't think I was specifically thinking about Metal Gear, but I think it became a way to. And there's points of development where there weren't any. There were points where some enemies had them, but others didn't. And I think we eventually just decided on we didn't want players to have to guess if they were going to start an encounter. Really, just became you because we didn't have random encounters, right? So you see little sprites on the map, you start the battle. We wanted players to know exactly when that would happen. We didn't want it to be a surprise. Even in some cases where it's unavoidable, there's some places where you're in a little corridor, you're just looking at there, you can't avoid the vision cone. And it became more of a, okay, well, but this is telling you this battle will start right here, this tile. Like, so save your game, change your equipment if you need to. Okay, now go ahead and do the game. We didn't want players ever frustrated or surprised or feeling like, oh no, I wasn't ready for this. I didn't mean to do this. Even like with the bosses, like every time you're about to start an encounter, it's like, are you sure you want to go forward? A cool draft of air comes down the hallway, soon spooky. Like, yeah, let's do it. Every time, of course, it's forecasting a boss. But I always hate that in games where I miss stuff. I go too far, and oh, now I can't go back. And even though you can go back in the game, like I wasn't ready, my party wasn't ready. I want to change my equipment or I want to save my game. Like, nope, now you're in a boss fight, and then you lost, and then now your save was back here, and that just kind of. I think our programmer Ishin had used the phrase like he didn't want people to have to do their taxes, and he hates doing his taxes. Like, okay, every fight, gotta use potions on every character, get all their health back up. Does anyone need ether? No. Okay, do I need to change this equipment? Let's change that. Okay, I've done my taxes. Now I can continue playing the game. He's like, well, I don't want to have to pay my taxes. Let's just get past all that stuff. So I think that was like, let's just pull as much of this stuff out as we can. Again, all in service of making all 10 hours of the game feel worth it.
I want to specifically point out there's a boss battle. I'll just sort of vaguely describe it. You're fighting a pair of enemies, and at the end of each turn, their health is reset to whoever has the most.
Yep.
And I was like, oh my God, have I not seen this mechanic in a game before? This is brilliant. Like, where did that come from? Who came up with that?
There has to be somewhere else where that's the case. Enemy design is interesting because the way that we ended up on enemy mechanics was there were so many different ways to come about it. And it's funny. I was telling one of my other game directors. I won't name names, but they were trying to figure out because I have a couple that I'm working with. So they were trying to figure out like, okay, should we do the mods like. Let's figure out all the mechanics and then we'll draw it. Or I can't remember, it might have been the other way around. And I said, just do whatever way. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. Because there were times where I would tell the artist, hey, I want a monster for this dungeon. I don't know, whatever you want. And then they come up with some monster. And I'm like, that's cool. And I'm like, okay, so it does this. So then I try to tell a story. I try to explain who that monster is, but like with the mechanics that it does. But there are other times where I would have a mechanic in mind, like, okay, I want this kind of setup. There's a big boss fight about midway through the game where you have to fight a bunch of characters at once and a bunch of bosses at once, and I really wanted to evoke like, okay, this is a big like rumble. Like, what are the right mechanics to express that so that you feel like you're in a big fight with a bunch of different things. I don't remember specifically how I landed on this mechanic with this later boss of like having to burn them down at the same time. But there was one of those like values of, you know, one of my little like niggles with some boss fights in RPGs. You got a boss with a big health bar, and you always get to a point sometimes, and a lot of the times, where eventually you've solved it. Like you've got, okay, I do a cure. Like you've got some, like, you just repeat your, it's like your damage rotation. The boss can never kill you. Maybe you've killed the ads. Maybe there was some other problem that it had. You solved it, and now you just got to whittle down that giant health bar and then get to the end. Now we're just testing your patience. And I noticed, probably by accident, I think it was probably the first major boss in the game that we did, which is the Dark Knight guy. And he was in the prototype. Actually, that's technically not true, but there was a boss in his position. But so he was one of the first bosses that we had, and I noticed at one point that as I was doing the fight, I noticed that I felt tense because every turn he could almost kill me, and it felt that way up until I defeated him. And I was like, oh, this is the feeling I want for every boss. I want every boss fight to feel like I'm 1 or 2 turns away from this thing turning south on me, and it all going to shit. And so every boss had to have something, you know, and there are obviously bosses and there's ways of solving each boss fight where you can trivialize it, but I also want players to be able to do that if they're clever. But that was sort of an important mechanic that on a lot of the fights would kind of feel tense the whole time, especially for these bigger boss battles. How to do that in a turn-based game, yeah, I had to come up with something. And I think I probably with those 2 in particular, I was just like, well, what do we do here? Like, okay, let's do something like this, like a rebalance mechanic. There's a couple other fights where you fight like 2 boss characters, and it's like, how do we make each one kind of feel interesting? Or then how do you make it feel interesting when one's defeated, right? Because that was the other thing. Well, it's 2 boss characters. Okay, I killed one. Now it's easy. Well, okay, so what do we do instead? So
you did go through early access with this. Was there feedback that you got from players that you were able to incorporate that was helpful, or was this like, because you mentioned you weren't going to do it in future games, so I wondered, it could have been all sunshine and rainbows.
Players were great. We didn't have any negative feedback. I think we did get a lot of we did put a lot of stuff that were like player ideas into the game. Try to think of some examples. Oh, so a great example is you can each of the 4 characters has like an environment thing that they can do. Like Porphyry can knock down boulders, Gigi can run into tunnels. Well, that all came from at Geek Girl Con. This little kid like being like, oh, I wish I could send Gigi to this little hole. And I was like, that would be cute. I guess I have to figure that out. And it ended up being a good idea for the whole game to do that. So now I distracted myself. What was your question?
So the feedback garnered in early access.
Oh yeah, feedback. So I can't recall any specific feedback we got during early access that we changed. Probably largely because a lot of the game was sort of like already in place when the game happened. So it wasn't like, here's chapter 1, what do you want chapter 2 to look like? But I think another reason we didn't get a lot of feedback, which ties directly into why I would be very careful about doing early access again, is that when you go into early access on Steam, and this is more advice for anyone thinking about doing this right now, if you're trying to, if you're relying on Steam to organically generate any of your traffic and sales, when you launch a game into early access, they give, like, they consider it in some ways, in other ways they don't, but there are some ways in which they consider that your launch. They give you a one-time kind of visibility boost. At least that's the way it works right now. They change how this stuff works all the time. So we got a visibility boost after we went to early access, and probably really like we just weren't there yet. And so we got a boost and no one kind of bought into the game yet. And so I think there's another aspect of it too, where we really so selling a game on Steam today, kind of like how pre-orders used to drive everything before. Now, when you launch a game on Steam, you really have to have your wish list count has to be really high. And the best case scenario for you as a developer is that going into like the week before you launch, you have the highest number of wish lists on Steam like that week. And then Steam will feature you on a new and noteworthy or upcoming, there's like a top 10 list that they put out. it'll just be on that front page of Steam. They'll say, hey, these games have the most wish lists and they're coming out soon. You want to be on that list because Steam's going to show you to way more people. You'll be on the front page. And so I think in our heads, we figured we'll put the game in early access and then we'll do our marketing and then we do the launch. Like, then we'll like nail it. Well, the reality was we should have had our wish list where we wanted them before we went into early access, not just 1.0. And although you do get more visibility as well, you get like full launch visibility when you do 1.0. It's also not the same. And so I think from like a marketing business perspective, in terms of like where do you want your numbers to be at, when you're looking at it, if your wish list numbers aren't where you want them to be, early access is no better for you than 1.0. Like you're going to have kind of the same sale splash, and probably a little less because less people buy early access than 1.0, I think, in general. Ironically, I don't. I typically don't play early access games. I'm like, oh my god, it's not done yet. I'll play it when it's done. Let me know when it's done. And so I think if we were redoing it over again, or next time we do a game, if everything was ready, like the full marketing package had been, we would treat early access as just the game launch, and then I think we would treat early access as maybe kind of like a live service type deal where full launch game is out, go play it, and then but we're committing to implementing more features based on your feedback that'll be free, and maybe this price point will be a little bit lower than like the 1.0 might be, rather than, hey, here's a sneak peek of the game and then we'll release it later, and then we'll do our marketing along the way. So that was the biggest lesson I think we learned is, it's just we didn't realize how much that was our launch. Had we known that, I don't know if we would have gone early access, but I still don't regret it because it's still, it was still good for team morale, I think, too, at the time.
Upcoming games.
Oh yeah, sure. We can talk about them a little bit. One I can talk about more than the other.
Yeah, I was gonna say is on Steam you can get a demo for Clockwork Ambrosia, and then in some of the marketing for Tower Song, you mentioned a deck building roguelike.
Yeah, so for Omega Entertainment's next game that we're developing, it's an unannounced game, but it is going to be a roguelike deck builder, and you can see some of the fun character art being put together for that. So I think one of the lessons we learned, I mean, it sounds silly. When I was just a player, I was like, this stuff is so lame. But there is something to waiting until the right moment when you kind of have your stuff together. Okay, here's our game. Here's to announce it with, and so it's not a secret, but yeah, we don't have an official announcement or title or all that, and that'll all probably come together. Probably here in the next 6 months or so, we'll announce that. But yeah, Clockwork Ambrosia was actually I have done development work on. I actually first started working on it in 2013 with the game director back then. Eventually left, for just life was too much. I couldn't do it. But the game kept on, and it's a little bit I say so. The game has been in development, and he had a prototype. The game director did in 2012. And yeah, at first you might say, well, you've been making this game for 12 years. That's crazy. What's wrong? Like, well, we decided to make a Metroidvania of the size and scope of like Hollow Knight, but with much smaller budget and pixel art and stuff like that. So it's so Clockwork Ambrosia is a Metroidvania, but it's more of a branch from Super Metroid than any of kind of the later Metroidvania games, where something that happened in the Metroid series where you had if you go from like Metroid to Metroid 2 to Super Metroid, the way that you could use your gun kind of changed. And so I think in Metroid 2, you could only ever have like one at a time. You could swap between the beam weapon or the phaser beam. But in Super Metroid, you could combine them. So then you started with like actually I don't remember the order, but you could get like the wave beam, then you could put ice on it, then you could put the spacer on it. You could turn them off, but they all kept adding. So now your shot splits. Now it splits and freezes. Now it goes through walls and freezes and splits. And so the game director, he kind of took that idea and kind of built on that into just like the next level. So Clockwork Ambrosia is this pixel Metroidvania, starring this airship engineer named Iris. She's going to this mysterious island to search for her friend, and she gets caught up in what seems to be some sort of robot rebellion. And the core conceit of the game is that players can let's see how I put this. So the core conceit of the game is that players build their weapons using a rule-based mod system, which is a lot like, I would say, kind of some of the mod systems or rule-based systems you might see like a Magic the Gathering or something like that. In terms of, so for example, you have a pulse breaker and it shoots shots. I mean, you could have a charge shot and just a regular shot, which is like a shotlet. And these are all subject to change and constant, but like, for example, and then you might get a mod that says, okay, every time you shoot a shotlet, shoot another shotlet also. So now when you fire that gun, it shoots 2 bullets at the same time. And then I'll say, okay, and then you put another mod on the same gun that says, okay, split every bullet you have. So now you're shooting 4 bullets. And then, oh, by the way, your charge shot now can also do this. So now your charge shot splits. So it's all these rules that add on to each other. And I think there's planning on 8 different weapons in the game right now, pending development and all that. But the idea is that as you go through this world, you're finding different weapons and different mods, and the way you stack these mods on each other. And each weapon can have 6 to 8 different mods, and they all stack on each other, and the rules all apply to each other and can affect each other, which leads to literally like tens of thousands or millions or whatever, like combinations of weaponry, like arsenal that you can have, and they all kind of work, and they all work as the way you expect them to. You got like a missile launcher, like, hey, after so long, it'll like take a turn and go over here, and then you can make it. But if it hits the ground, it also runs along the ground, so then you can start to play with, just create kind of fun designs. So I'm really excited for that game. I helped work on enemies and level and story way back in the day, and then I stepped away, and then coming back, and some of that stuff that's continued. And the team has just done a really good job of just like breathing life into this world, and the weapon mods and the environments, and and the art. I think it's just coming together really great. I'm really proud of the team. And yeah, I'm coming back, and after Tower Song saying, hey, I made all these mistakes shipping a game. Can I help you not make those same mistakes? Like, let me quote unquote publish your game, which is, not at all like the typical publisher models that you'll have seen, but that's kind of the phrase we're using. But he said, okay, yeah, sure, let's do that. And so I have come back, and I'm helping produce the game, and actually the whole Omega Entertainment studio is kind of cheering them on, and helping them with the game in different ways. But yeah, pretty fun stuff. The game will actually, so people in the Seattle area or people going to Geek Girl Con will be able to actually play the game at that event there too. We'll have a little booth.
That's great. Yeah, there's a demo up now that I played on Steam. You can wishlist it. Go check it out.
Talking to Nolan, one of the things we've been playing was Slay the Spire and Into the Breach. I was telling him at one point, like, I don't play roguelikes. Like, those are the only 2 I've ever played. And he almost immediately was like, oh, it's Perfect Enemy. That's what lets you enjoy those battles more. And I feel like Tower Song incorporated that.
Mm-hmm.
And almost with the red vision cones,
right.
There's this, you don't feel cheated by the computer, in quotes. I'd like to get Nolan's thoughts on that, since he was the brilliant one that came up with it. And then I want to sort of spin that to you and talk about, its use in Tower Song, and then potentially if you're going to use it or something similar in your deck builder.
I think what I actually said first was it's because they're good ones. That's why you play them. Right? It's not that you don't like, it's not that you dislike roguelites is that you dislike bad roguelike. But yeah, I think that that is something that makes them very approachable, is that they do have perfect enemy information, and it allows you to understand the systems at a glance. So it really helps you get into the gameplay.
Totally. I mean, I think my first real awakening to the power of roguelikes, which was, and it's not even the first like roguelike I had, but just how far that language could go was when everybody was kind of obsessed with Spelunky for a hot minute. And that's a perfect example of what you're talking about, Nolan. The enemies react. Everything's based on a rule. The rule never changes. There's no exceptions to the rule. So every time you die, you know like you could have predicted it. Now, maybe where you went past the point of no return might be farther back than you'd like, but you were, and you might be surprised, but you could always say, okay, because it happened because of that. I pushed my luck. Usually, I knew what I was doing, and yeah, the same thing with Tower Song, and going back to that, making interesting turn-based battles. We just couldn't. We didn't want to trick the player. It wouldn't work in a game that short either. It wouldn't add that much to like that's just not the kind of game we're building. Like you can make turn-based games where you're trying to trick and subvert player expectations, but what we wanted was that if the player lost, it's because their strategy was wrong, not because they got tricked or didn't expect a thing. Now, I wouldn't, of course, you have to practice and play things, but I didn't want it to be because you couldn't predict what the enemy was going to do. Like I never wanted to be, and Ishin was very very big on this with me too. And it should tell you something that he's like one of the lead designers on the next game, but he's like, I don't want to lose because of the RNG. I want to lose because my strategy was wrong and I wasn't thinking about it. And because I was pushing my luck when I shouldn't have been, or not pushing my luck hard enough. And I think that was something that we really try to hold to. I never wanted you to win or lose a boss battle because RNG. Phew, the boss didn't use that terrible move for 3 turns in a row, therefore I won. I think with Tower Song, inevitably, there's probably still some of that possible, so I won't say that we eliminated it, but it was something we tried to reduce as much as possible. So that's where that enemy intent came from, and we really had to break RPG Maker was not interested in that at all. Did not know. So we really had to, and that's where Ishin, I think, really kind of got into the game, because he wrote his own plugin for the engine and really kind of broke it, and also is like, okay, we're never doing RPG Maker again. We'll build our own, we'll use Unity, we'll find somebody else's and license it, but we're just RPG Maker was to make anything other than those kinds of games. But anyway, that's just really an aside about RPG Maker. I mean, RPG Maker is great, like, but for certain things. Anyway, so yeah, so like enemy intent or even enemy states, which I don't know if you guys noticed, and we did our best to advertise it, but sometimes enemies would set up like preparation moves, and they would do something that now they were preparation, which tells you next turn they will do this. Sometimes they'd mark a character. So we really wanted it to be clear what was happening, and if you paid any attention at all and seriously wanted to know what the bosses were doing, you would kind of be able to predict how fights were going to go. And on hard mode, that's which is where I prefer to play, but I mean, even now I get spanked on the same boss. I'm like, okay, my strategy, I need to try something else. And I would say even with Clockwork Ambrosia, there's an element of like, that's still important, because like that is a game we don't want to be too difficult. We want players to just have a really, like, the joy of discovery and the delight of finding new things. We don't want players to get hung up on like a crazy boss. So, and it's a different, like, how to properly advertise how things will work and behave in like a 2D platformer, very different language than a turn-based. But I think there's still that element of bosses telegraphing their attacks in a way, but yeah, it's definitely different with with a real-time, any kind of reflex-based. What perfect information looks like is a different thing there, but I think it's a good principle.
I think one other thing I have to thank you for in Tower Song is so I have a younger child and sort of a youngish child, and in Tower Song, you can hover over the enemies, at least with your mouse if you're on the computer, and it will tell you exactly the states, what they're doing. When I had to go change a diaper and come back, it wasn't like I was lost and I didn't know who I had marked and who was marking me. Like, you could literally walk away in the middle of a battle and come back and know everything that was going on, and so I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I mean, some of us have kids. That's just the reality. We get 10 minutes to play, and I want a Tower Song to have I can go in, do one battle, even leave in the middle of it, pause it, come back. The game auto saved if I forgot to save, and I'll come back and keep going. Your party your party gets all of their health and items back after every battle, so you don't have to you resume your save and get into the next fight. Oops, I forgot to do my taxes, and then my party is all at half health. No, just pick it up, keep going. Put it down again. Works great on Steam Deck, also for the same reason. We want to have that good play. So yeah, I'm glad that worked for you.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about the studio, do you imagine yourself serially working on a game after game, or are you trying to grow bigger, or in 10 years you want to be done? What is your long-term thinking?
I think I would say our 5-year plan would be that we're all employed by the studio and we're doing it full time. I think that I will always have to be making games. There was the period between when I left school at DigiPen and then started doing game design again, which I would argue is when I started running my Pathfinder campaign as the DM, because that's it's a little bit it's D&D is a game engine and you're building a game out of it, or maybe a modding engine if you want to get technical, but I had to be a game designer to run that campaign for folks and reawaken to, oh, right, this thing that I love that's so important to me. And so I think with that, I think as long as, and what I've told the team is, as long as you guys want to make a game, we'll put it out. We have kind of a rule or an agreement with the company where any if the company publishes it and funds it, it can keep the money, but you own the IP. So we're trying to do that. I don't know, like that, like the imprint style, or so I own Tower Song, but our next game is owned by Annie and Ishin. They own that IP, so we get to publish it, make money off of it. But if they want to go make a sequel later, okay, they can. I think we have some, there's rules in there, so you can't just trying to protect the company, but at the same time, it's we don't want to own the work. We want the studio to be, at the very least, a vessel or a platform for all the people that we've collected here. If you guys have a game, you're putting it out, we'll publish it. We'll put it out there. We'll do whatever marketing we have time for. Or in it, even if it's nothing, even if we just list it on our Steam store under our label, we'll put it out there. It'll get a little more traffic than it would get if you just put it on a random itch.io page. So with that in mind, and knowing that I will always want to make some kind of game, it could end up being just a game for silly little RPG Maker games or whatever I can make in my spare time, or it could be a vehicle for that. But I think we will always be having games coming out. Now, are they big commercial releases with all this stuff? That will depend on whether or not we can eventually make profit off the games and fund the business, and that's going to determine whether or not you're seeing Omega Entertainment at Summer Game Show at some point. It'll all be driven based on that. But we'll always be making games because we just love making games. And I think that's the only way we wouldn't be making games is if we all got jobs making games for somebody else, and then they would be publishing our games. But so that's kind of our intent. And so we have in the next couple of years, we have Clockwork Ambrosia, and then game number 2, which right now I would say probably 2026 should be a fair shot that we would be putting it out then. I don't think we want to be working on it for, again, like Tower Song, we don't be working on it for 3 years. So I'll put out a game for the next couple of years and kind of see where it goes.
What's your relationship to games outside of game development? What do you like to play? How long have you been playing them?
Oh God, I mean, I've been playing games since my older brother showed me his Super Mario Brothers game, and I was probably 6 or 7 at the time. I think, especially as a game developer, it's important to play as many games as you can, as many different games as you can. And I think one thing, not to jump ahead of your questions, but one thing that I really appreciate about Dev Game Club, and I even have a friends group game club that we do for the same reason, because it just being kind of forced through the structure of a game club to play. And I always play along, and I won't listen to an episode if I haven't played the game yet, which means I'm always usually a couple games behind, but I will play the game and listen to the episodes. there's been some exceptions where also like Trespasser, just getting it to run would seem to be just as difficult as playing the game if you got it to run. So I opted to just watch somebody do a let's play, but I watched somebody play it with minimal commentary so I could kind of see what the game was, and then that's about as far as I'll go. But I think just being exposed to games, like it's out of it. It's video games are such a rich activity to engage in, especially compared to books and movies, which I also love, but just that the experience of a game and how it can engage all of your senses, your thinking, but like your heart and your brain all at the same time. I don't know of any other medium that can do that. I'll always love games for it. And so I have favorite genres. Like I love RPGs and strategy games, probably are like my number ones, but I play almost everything that I can. Like if it seems good, or if it seems sometimes even just important, which Dev Game Club I think helps with that a lot. I'll play it. I'll try it, and which leads me to playing lots of like weird games. Like, but I play through Rogue. I did a lot of I'm not ashamed to save scum, whatever it takes. But I got to the bottom of Rogue and got all the way back out, and it probably took me 5 hours of save scumming, but I played through that game for the show, and it was an experience. I'll tell you what. But even when you save scum your way through a game like that, you learn something about like what were they trying to do here and how well did it work. And I think actually maybe even starting next year we might try to do like a studio game club kind of thing. Maybe the games we'll play will be more specifically related, like deck builders and stuff like that. But like, let's get the team playing a game. Let's step away from like, yeah, maybe we'll take a couple sprints. We won't work. We'll just play some games together to get ourselves into just different headspaces and figure out what works, what doesn't work. Be inspired. I don't know. But right now I'm actually playing Alan Wake. I'm going through like I said, I'm behind, so I'm playing the original Alan Wake. I'm going through those episodes in the show, and then also listening to the Dragoon Effect version of it, which is really fun too. And then my wife and I are playing Shifu for our Friends Game Club, which is a very different game, very different experience.
It's a non-gaming hobby that you have.
What? I don't understand the question. No, I mean probably the biggest time sink for me right now that isn't games is our puppy that we got a couple months ago. She's a lot of fun. I think she's too young for right now. I found out you don't want to take puppies on long runs when they're really young because their body's still developing and can cause like longer term problems if I guess there's like their bones on their shoulder blades have to grow all the way until that's happened. Like too much of certain kind of physical activity like running can be bad for them. But I really like trail running, and I'm really looking forward to when she's old enough and she'll go run with me. So that's probably a good second hobby.
Tell us everything about your dog. What's her name? Likes, dislikes. What does she look like?
Her name is Zelda. Yes, Zelda. Yeah. She her full name is Zelda Hecate, and so my wife like loves witches. You can tell Tally. Yes, Tally. My wife. Same. Tally Gigi. Yes, that's my wife and our cat. And I was like, the Hecate is also a character in the Zelda games, right? She's like, yeah, I do. I'm like, okay, we'll do this name. Yeah, she's a black 5-month-old. She'll be 5 months old tomorrow, which is incredible. She's a Labrador pit bull mix. She'll do anything for a treat, anything for a bone. She loves, she's really smart. She dislikes right now, seems like she dislikes the dark. I guess maybe I've been playing too much Alan Wake. I don't know. But now that it's getting darker earlier and darker for later, she's not wanting to go on her little walks. She's like, no, I'm okay. We're good. I'll go back home now. So that's been kind of a cute discovery.
I think there's now an expectation with Gigi in Tower Song that Zelda should be in Clockwork Ambrosia.
Oh, that's true. I could probably at least get a cameo. I'd pay the artist to make that sprite and the contractor, but probably actually she should probably show up in the deck builder for sure, at least maybe with a card. So what's funny, the problem is when you do self inserts of your pets, but then you name your pets after characters, is like, you're referencing Zelda. I'm like, no, I'm referencing my dog. And Gigi, who in real life was named after Kiki's cat from Kiki's Delivery Service. So people might think, oh, it's Kiki's Delivery Service cat. I'm like, well, no, it's actually our cat. But yes, Gigi. Yeah, same Gigi.
So, what are some support mechanisms you have in place in life?
Definitely my wife. I think it's always been easy to, I mean, from the beginning, I knew that she was the one because it's just like, she's just the most validating, supportive person I've ever known. And hopefully she feels the same way, but we both try for that in the marriage. And I think that's what's got us this far. I think also having those friends, I mean, like going back to the studio and forming that studio with my friend, like I chose somebody that I really trust and loved. And because then kind of whatever it was, whether it was a difficult decision we were trying to make for the business, or even though I was just stressed out about the game, there was somebody I could call and could say, I don't know what to do. And sometimes he didn't know either, but we could talk about it. I think video games are a good one of the healthier coping mechanisms in moderation, in terms of being able to let you really just think about and stress about something that has absolutely no stakes or consequences to it for a little while.
I mean, I would insert trail running too, right?
Yeah, for sure. Probably it is one of those things when you don't run or do an exercise like that, and then people who talk about running and they talk about like the runner's high, the euphoria, and you're like, yeah, right, come on. And I've never had, I think the euphoria that people are experiencing, I wonder if that's not maybe just like dehydration or something, because I've never like gotten that level of like, I'm in another state. My body is shutting down and going to survival mode because I've almost killed it running this marathon without drinking enough water. But I think being able to go out, and I think and I always want to be able to live where I can hit like a trail and go somewhere scenic, but just being out there, no distractions, no work, just out running. It's always up to the first 10 minutes of a trail run, I'm often like, I don't want to do this. Why am I here? What am I doing? This is stupid. And then I get about 10 minutes in, like, oh, I should head back. I'm like, do I really want to? Do I have to? Yes, you do. You're not fit enough to keep going. I've made that mistake before. You go too far too fast. But that's a good one. I mean, exercise, is a good answer in terms of support mechanism. But am I doing it as often as I should? Absolutely not. So I think when you're not able to do those harder but healthier things, I think pets and family and friends, very generic answer, but they're there. The right people, investing in the right people, which is the theme of Tower Song. Who is a good friend to have in this crazy world?
Some suggestions for other media for people to check out, or books that you enjoy, or films or music?
Oh, non-game related. Let's see.
I like that you immediately went to game related.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's kind of where I've been at, and I think for like 5 months around the release of Tower Song, I didn't do anything but Tower Song, and then after that, I was like, I need to play games again, and so I've been kind of forcing myself. And then we got a puppy, and that was also very distracting. So I've been forcing myself lately to play games again, which has been actually very healthy for me in a lot of ways, and so I think that's just where my head's at. But things of like, if people are like, oh, what should I watch or what should I read? Well, you should watch Foundation on Apple TV. It is amazing, like high budget sci-fi. It's like they took an impossible to adapt book series and made it so interesting and so compelling. And I love hard sci-fi, like stuff set in space. I don't know, I think that's just, and maybe on that, I'd also read, I'd recommend people check out like the Expanse series. These are all kind of like old recommendations. I'm like almost never watching anything new because I'm always behind. I'm always busy doing other things. But those are probably some of the favorite things that I've done recently that stick out.
Well, then let's talk about a game recommendation. What should Dev Game Club play?
Do you want to drop Tower Song?
Yeah, they should play Tower Song. I don't know. That's almost too scary to contemplate. I think Mirror's Edge would be a really interesting game for them to play. From what I can tell, it changed the way that platforming works in first-person shooters after that, even shooters, which Mirror's Edge wasn't really. But it changed. Like that game at the time was a revelation. It was like how it felt to move. You felt physically present in that space. I even turned off in that game. You can by default, it highlights kind of the things in the world you can mantle on, but I turned it all off and found that the level design actually did lead you to a really nice like parkour. And I think there was one puzzle maybe where I had to turn on the hints to figure out where I was supposed to go. I think that'd be a fantastic game for me to play. Actually, and it wouldn't be too new because I think it came out right after or before Dead Space, which they've also covered. So I think that'd be a good one. I think it informs a lot of the way, like when I look at like mantling and like modern games, I'm like, that came from Mirror's Edge. Like they may not have played it, but they played a game that did play me. Like somewhere along the line, that DNA translated along.
How did you find the podcast?
I think I wanted a Game Club podcast. I think I first found one. I had mentioned this in the Discord actually when they did Beyond Good and Evil, because the first Game Club podcast thing I ever did was, I believe it was I think it was One Up FM back in like, I don't know, I guess that was the late aughts. They did a couple Game Club episodes. I think they only did a few before One Up kind of closed. And they did Beyond Good and Evil, which is where I played it with. But then they went on to do, I think, a few more with Rebel FM. And that might have been where I played it too. So if somebody goes back like, no, it was Rebel FM, you might be right. I don't remember actually. I think we dug it up. Maybe it was Rebel FM, and maybe Beyond Good and Evil wasn't the first. But so I had that experience. I'm like, it's really fun to play a game. Like again, I like the excuse to like go play a game, have some sort of time down. Hey, it's a new episode. Okay, I should do it soon. And so I think it was. I want to say it was probably. I think I'd heard about the show and maybe tried it a couple times, like around 2017 or 2018. Probably just I Googled Game Club podcasts, and I think they came up. But when pandemic happened, we're all in our house. I'm like, okay, I'm going to start this, and I went back to episode 1, played System Shock 2. So, and I think that's where I really got into it and started following along and playing. Generally, I'm within like a year, I think, of their episodes now. And it's just really fun. I think playing along with the show has been really rewarding too.
I guess the only downside of doing it is you can't email.
No, I mean sometimes I'm caught up enough to email. But yeah, usually it would be like, hey, I'm playing I'm playing Alan Wake, which you played actually a while ago. Or I think I actually just because I missed it, I went back and played Eye of the Beholder like last month. So. Yeah, but I don't know. Sometimes I'll go in the Discord anyway, and be like, I have some thoughts about this game that some of you guys played a year ago, and usually people, it's fun for people to remember. But it's okay. I mean, I think I'm not usually interactive with the show in that way. It's just very fun to like listen to these I don't know, titans of industry. Their perspective on the games that they play is so interesting, especially because their history in the industry goes back often as far as some of these games with so being able to hear about, well, we weren't anywhere near this game, but we were working on this at the time, or we knew some of these people, especially a lot of the interviews that they pull together. I think it's a really interesting show. I mean, it's recommended listening to me. I recommend it to my team, like whether you guys play or not, you just listen to the show, listen to what they think about these games. I think I don't know. It's if anybody who's a fan of video games ever asks me for a podcast recommendation, I'm not just saying this because I'm on this in this interview. Dev Game Club, it would be my number one recommendation. I think it's the most rewarding video game related podcasts that you can listen to.
What's a pillar or takeaway from their series for you?
Key takeaways. I think that. Even when the design sucks, and of course Trespasser is a classic example, but even when a decision's made and it sucks, I think, and like as a player, like this is boring, I hate this, why is this in here? I think from the show they're able to divine, and a lot of times they're able to divine, and they're probably wrong, but they're probably like 10 to 20% correct on maybe why did they make the decision, why is the game behaving this way, why does it act like this, why it's I think that's interesting both when it works, which is probably even more interesting like this, maybe sometimes interesting, I don't know, they're both interesting, right? I think as game designers we can get caught up on like giving ourselves negative feedback, but asking ourselves what about our games is actually working and is good, I think is a harder question to ask as a developer. So I think being able to pinpoint what works about these games and why. People might look back at a Prince of Persia or a Deus Ex and say, why was this game so popular? Why did it change the industry? Well, because it was great and people loved it. Well, what was great about it? Why? And being able to dig into that So I think a key takeaway for me would be that games are made in a variety of conditions that don't lead to optimal decisions in terms of game design, whether that's for a variety of circumstances that could be budget, time related, or just other design constraints. And I think this show is able to dig into that and at least begin to theorize on how we got to where we ended up with this game and why that was good or bad. Sometimes when you're making a game and you're trying to get a commercial, it's like, what are we gonna do? Like, well, there's nothing we can't do. We just have to stick with this bad decision that we made last year. Jeez. Yeah, I have a counter question for you guys.
Sure.
Go for it.
What has been the most rewarding part about doing these community podcasts for you guys so far? Like, why are you still doing them, right? What's been rewarding about it for you each personally?
So I think that it's been super rewarding to get to know more about the people who are in this Discord. It's, you only get a certain very limited slice of them. Usually you don't even know what they look like. You can't get their sense of humor or how they talk, and being able to talk with people over Zoom is pretty great.
I think the easy answer is I don't know, it's just part of my personality. It's easy to talk to people, and I enjoy getting to know them. And I thought, you have no tech skill set, so what could you bring to this that somebody might not have? And I've watched Nolan stream enough to know that his dry sense of humor would work well with my sort of talkiness. Having done a couple now, I think, humanizing the people that we see on screen, or, hear when it's Ben, or, see when it's Nolan and Kaon and Kyle and Lost Lake, who you haven't heard his yet, but that's in the can. Providing a fuller picture is always going to have or allow you to get more perspective of people, right? And so, I just think it leads to better understanding of where people are coming from.
Have you guys offered to or thought about interviewing Tim and or Brett as well? Yeah, I think that'd be interesting.
The interviews are always my favorite episodes of the podcast anyways. So I think that the sort of nuggets of wisdom that come out of those are so much more profound than just sort of reflecting on a game, really. Talking with someone and getting their point of view on something, and then, be like, oh, here's what I took from it. It's how meaning is formed.
Yeah, you end up, you hear it every time they interview somebody, and every time you guys have done it too, like a story is being told. You may not be able to put act 1, act 2, act 3 around it, but you're getting a sense of the story of what happened. I think some of those interviews have been very interesting in terms of like, how did this thing come about, even for people tangentially related. I mean, I think they interviewed the guy who's, I think his primary role was like coming up with the branding for Arkham Asylum, but that was a super interesting interview. Like the story behind and just that guy's story, was, whether it was, even when he wasn't talking about Batman, like super interesting, right? So yeah, I think you guys are onto something by taking that interview, bonus episode and saying, let's make this whole thing. I think you guys have stumbled onto a good thing there. It's worthy of doing more of.
Thank you.
Their interviews are excellent for this. They have I wouldn't call it a hot take, but there's moments in these interviews to me that crystallize something about the game or an interesting aspect in somebody's life that informed it. And it's always funny to hear Brett and Tim interact with it, finding out that Diablo was turn-based until he decided to just turn the stop time down in between attacks. That's insane. Right. Or the one musician had a guitar of Van Halen's. Julian Gollop finding out that Brett was sort of screwing himself by save scumming because the game scaled with him. Right? There's all these little moments in these interviews that I always find so funny. Do you have a favorite one or a moment for you that stands out?
I don't know. They're all really interesting. And something that I mean, this is a crazy practice for the I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but something I tried with and I've done this a couple times with different ones, but I did this for Eye of the Beholder, where so I play the game up until the episode, then I'd load up the episode, and then I'd load up like a Let's Play around that same content, mute it, and then just like watch the video, and then just listen to the podcast, not do chores, not drive to work, not do any other stuff that I'm always doing when I'm doing podcasts. Like I'm just gonna absorb what they're saying, keep my stupid brain distracted with the muted Let's Play. And I think there's just really like, they end up talking about D&D and like and how that works and how that actually doesn't translate that well to games, except for the one time I did with Baldur's Gate 3, but like how hard that must have been. Then you can appreciate like how challenging that must have been for Larian Studios. And probably my favorite one is always the last one that I listen to, because I always just have a good time. So right now I'm like, the Beholder series is great because that's the last one I listened to. And I can't believe, like when I first started playing Eye of the Beholder to go along with the show, for the first probably 30 minutes, it was like, I don't know about this. This is really like, I gotta, okay, like, because it's so, just that dungeon crawler, very old school. There's no, the interface is just like, I think that first enemy, like, I'm going to fight this enemy, and you got to like click on the weapon, then click on the enemy. I'm like, what is this interface? At the time, of course, it was, this is a 90% game on Metacritic in its time, right? Like nowadays, of course. But then I think one of the most surprising things about the show and playing along with the show is like by the end of that, though, even by the halfway point, I'm like, I'm having a good time with this game. Like I've sort of figured it out. I figured out how to engage with it. Sure, I'm save scumming a little bit, although that game supports it more than others. But like there was an auto map tool that came with the Steam collection that I figured out. Like that made the game. Obviously, that's not something you had. I know they don't use those tools. Like they were hand drawing their maps, and I'm like, oh, you poor, but you poor guys, but. So I find ways to make the game enjoyable enough, but then it lets enough that I can start to engage with the mechanics that are there, and I think just seeing like the different dungeon levels they did, I'm like, wow, they have lots of different biomes here. There's different enemy types, and they try to come up with interesting D&D rules to directly translate. And the fact that I ended up kind of having a good time with Eye of the Beholder, whereas at the beginning I was like, this might be another one of those Let's Play ones where I just watch it like I did with Trespasser. I don't know about this, and then by the end I was like, no, that was okay. That was actually kind of fun. That's crazy to me. I can't believe that happened. I think that's why I would always tell anyone, like, play along with the show. You will be glad you did. Break whatever rules you have to. They're like, we'll read the manual. We won't Google anything. I'm like, that's great for the show. I can't get down with that. But if you can play the game, I think you'll have a good time. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up? I think this is great that you guys are doing this. I think it's a great show. Like I said, a great show, great community. I again was flattered that you asked, but really, really grateful for the opportunity to come talk about my experience making Tower Song, which you can buy today on Steam. And I also appreciate you letting me, do that. And you mentioned Clockwork Ambrosia, so I appreciate that. And I don't know, who knows? Maybe this time next year we'll be talking about Clockwork Ambrosia for a follow-up interview.
Along with Tower Song, which you can buy on Steam, you want to drop all the information where people can find your studio or your itch page, and then I'll have Nolan do his too.
Just go to oi.games, and we've got all of our links, all of our socials and Steam pages and HIO pages. That's all there. So, and if you want to hear more of me, you can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/calamitynolan, and you can find my games at upatnight.games.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Discord Game Club Just Rhetoric. We want to thank Brett and Tim for making the Dev Game Club podcast and for giving us a slot in their release feed. We also want to thank Mark and Artemage for starting the Discord Game Club podcast. Go listen to those episodes if you haven't already. If you'd like to hear more interviews like these, let us know. You can find us in the Dev Game Club Discord for Calamity Nolan and Biostats. Goodbye!